So today we're going to start a new series on female serial killers, and we're going to do that with a slightly different format. As you can tell, please let us know if you like this new format or if you want a mix of the new format and the old format, or if you're ambivalent and just want to know more about serial killers regardless of how it looks. We really want to figure out what works best in 2022. Today we're going to talk about Marie Besnard, who's a French serial killer. She is called the Black Widow of Loudun, and she, like many female serial killers, chose to employ poison as one of her as the main methodology, because often poison is much easier to achieve death with when you're a female. If you think about it, historically, women have been relegated into the kitchen, into positions of servitude where they have to, give food and drink to those around them. And ultimately, with that increased access, they're able to poison people with ease. So it's not shocking that half of all female serial killers use poison at some time in their killing sprees. Marie Besnard made it her primary method of execution, and she really ultimately made millions and died a rich and free woman after taking the lives of 13 people. So we're going to talk about her today. We're going to start with Marie Besnard, who's called the Black Widow of Loudun. She was born at the turn of the century in Loudun, France in 1896, and she had to pave out her own way in life because she wasn't born into the lap of luxury, and back then women did not have a lot of social equity to make their own way in life. And so Marie decided that her method of accumulating wealth would be killing people and taking their inheritances. Ultimately, she took her first victim from her own family tree. He was not only her cousin, but also her first husband. And Marie married him in 1920. His name was Auguste Antony. And 7 years after they were married, he would die of pleurisy. And at first, it wasn't suspicious that he had died because he had suffered from tuberculosis in the past, but ultimately he would be Marie's first victim. And when his body was later exhumed, they found 60 milligrams of arsenic in his system. So that was Marie's first victim, and really set the tone for how she would choose to take the lives of her victims. Antony was eventually exhumed, and they found 60 milligrams of arsenic in his system. Ultimately, after Antony died, she inherited some money, nothing too crazy, but it was his life savings. And since he died earlier than expected, that was, a considerable sum. And that started it all. In 1928, just 11 months after burying her first husband, Marie met Loudun Besnard. And on August 12th in 1928, they married. Both husband and wife were really envious of his his parents, her in-laws, because they were really wealthy and they came from a family, that had a lot of wealth. And so Marie figured out a way around that. And instead of waiting for Loudun's grandmother and great aunt and parents to die in order to inherit the family fortune, they kind of circumvented that issue. Loudun's great aunt was the first one to die at the age of 86, unexpectedly. Following her death, his grandmother died, and she was 92, so while it was unexpected, it wasn't shocking, and there was no official inquest. Louise Guérin was the 92-year-old grandmother, and ultimately it was her fortune that Loudun's parents inherited. So now, check got the grandmother, check got the great aunt. Now it's his parents who were in, Marie's sights. When Marie and Leon saw that Marie's in-laws had inherited all this money, they decided to feign concern about their, old age and invited them to move in with them so that Marie could assist the couple in their elderly years, which meant, of course, preparing all of their meals and knowing where they sleep. Later, Marie would use this opportunity to slowly poison first her father-in-law and then her mother-in-law. Leon's father would die seemingly from ingesting poison mushrooms, and then 3 months later, Leon's mother would die of pneumonia. The considerable estate that the couple left was divided up equally between Leon and his sister Lucy. Lucy would eventually be found dead of suicide shortly after. Shockingly, local police did not find it suspicious that a young woman such as Lucy, who had just inherited the equivalent of millions of dollars, would feel emboldened to end her life. Even though there was neighborly gossip of a Besnard jinx, family jinx that was maybe afflicting all the different members who had suddenly fallen ill and died unexpectedly, authorities, whether they were naive or just untrained, decided to look the other way. And the Besnards, both Marie and Leon, were able to enjoy the fruits of their nefarious labors without inquiry or inquest. And especially after Lucy's death, you think that some people would start getting suspicious and maybe at least look with a little, different perspective at the couple. But nope, they kept living their life and enjoying the inheritance that was slowly growing in amount. Marie paused on murdering the family members of her husband. At that point, she had killed her husband's great aunt, his grandmother, his mother, his father, and his sister. And she was running out of inheritances to gather. So she decided to kill her own father. And in May of 1940, Marie's father, Pierre Davaillou, died officially due to an intracerebral hemorrhage, although later when they exhumed his remains, it was discovered that he also had arsenic in his system. Shocking, but also not shocking, because he would be just another of the many deaths that would start being attributed to Marie, and still no authorities were looking into any of these deaths, and no one stopped to maybe wonder who was benefiting financially from all of these unexpected deaths and sicknesses and ailments and suicides. No one was suspicious at all. So after killing off most of her in-laws and then her own father, as well as her sister-in-law, Marie decided to look outside of her family tree for her next victim and came up with the idea to sublet part of their home to a wealthy childless couple named the Rives. And the Rives were actually close friends of Leon. Monsieur Toussaint Rivier was the best friend of Leon. And actually there was a rumor that Marie had had an affair with Toussaint Rivier. Madame Blanche Rivier and Monsieur Toussaint Rivier, they were living in the home. They were being served food by Marie and drink, and were generally being taken care of by her. And so they decided to leave all of their estate to Marie and made a will where she was the sole heir to their considerable estate. This was essentially signing their own death warrants, because shortly after the rights of the estate were established, in the summer of 1939, Monsieur Rivier died of pneumonia, although later 18 milligrams of arsenic would be discovered in his exhumed remains. And about a year later, in December of 1941, his wife, Madame Rivier, would also die. And although they attributed her death to being of natural causes, her remains actually contained 30 milligrams of arsenic. After inheriting the estate of the Riviers, you can imagine Marie's pleasure when it was discovered that her two elderly cousins had also left their estate to her in their wills. And these cousins were sisters who had been living together after one of them had become widowed and the other was a spinster. And they both left the bulk of their estate to Marie. So it was to nobody's surprise that at the age of 88, Pauline died on July 1st in 1945 after she shockingly confused a bowl of lye for her pudding one night. Her remains were later found to contain, unsurprisingly, 48 milligrams of arsenic. A week later, Virginia made the same unprecedented mistake when she confused her food for a bowl of lye, and at the age of 83, she passed away. Later, her remains were found to contain 20 milligrams of arsenic. The body count of Marie was now up to 9. Her first husband, her second husband's extended family, her second husband's parents, her father, the Riviers, and both of her elderly female cousins. She's basically like the opposite of a cat. They have 9 lives. She claimed 9 lives. Although I'm sure if cats had thumbs, they would claim far more than 9 lives too. My cat, I know, is murderous. Marie's mother would ultimately become the next victim. Marie Davaillou, whose maiden name was Antony, died on January 16th of 1949. Her remains contained 48 milligrams of arsenic when later exhumed. And it's interesting because when you look at where all of these murders are taking place, we're now at 10. The setting of Marie's killing is actually almost as morbid as the killings themselves. Marie and Léon lived in Loudun, and Loudun, France is still a really small town. It only has about 8,000 people living there because it was affected by the Black Plague 6 times, starting in 1482 and spanning into the final and most well-known plague of 1632. The pestilence, or the Black Plague, was something that was constantly wiping out the population of Loudun. So death kind of hung over that town. During the last epidemic of the plague in 1632, and that epidemic actually spanned from the fall of 1632 until the summer of 1633, the entire town was locked down. And we can relate to that, but it was far more strict than I think any of us can imagine. No one was allowed in, no one was allowed out, and even though nobody actually knew the direct causes of the pestilence, there were a lot of attempts to ward off the disease by burning different plants and herbs such as lavender, mint, camphor, and some people say that when you go to Loudun, you can still smell the olfactory remains of that meager attempt at fighting off the pestilence in 1632 and 1633. And so the environment that Marie was choosing to kill these victims really has a history of death and morbidity in and of itself. Now that Marie had killed 10 people, they were living in the lap of luxury. Marie was enjoying buying fine fur coats, and Léon was all about purchasing exotic horses. They had never had children, which definitely caused some rumors in the town. And there was a lot of, speak of the couple's mutual disloyalty to each other and the fact that both sides were having affairs. There was some public gossip about Léon having taken a lover, and then there was more gossip about Marie having fallen for another man. And ultimately, both probably happened, and both probably led to Marie's decision to make her next victim her second husband. So Léon was the next target, although why a man so close to Marie and aware of her murderous methodology would continue to ingest food and drink given to him by Marie is beyond my logic. I mean, at that point, if he had already been stepping out on her and he knew that she was in love with a farmhand who had been working on their property, I mean, at this point, it should be obvious that she's not pleased with him and that he's the next target should be something that he was well aware of. So why he continued to eat the food that Marie made, I don't know. But at one point, Leon remarked to a close friend, Madame Pintou, was actually the local postwoman, and even though she was not attractive at all, people said that she was very like authoritative and like domineering, and that Leon liked that. And Leon actually said to her that he thought he was being poisoned by Marie. He said that Marie had served him some soup in a bowl and that bowl already contained a liquid. He said to his affair partner, "It was at the farm. We were going to have soup. I saw some liquid in my plate, and Marie poured the soup into it. I ate the soup, and I vomited almost immediately." He died shortly afterwards, on October 25th, 1947, apparently of uremia, which is a failure in the kidneys, but later it would be found that he also had arsenic in his system. Finally, law enforcement officials began investigating Marie after her husband died, and then her mother died. People started getting a little bit suspicious, and a family curse really is less obvious as just Marie being a straight up serial killer. So for years, residents had, whispered that Marie possibly was involved with this, but it wasn't until 1949, after Miss Pinto, the postwoman's home, was burglarized and ransacked with nothing actually taken, that police launched an official investigation because they were at that time suspicious that Marie had something to do with robbing Pinto's house because she was, too wise to take any food or drink from Marie. So Marie tried to scare her out of town by ransacking her house. And then there was another man named Auguste Massip, and he had his house set on fire. Again, the police were suspicious that Marie had done that in order to get them out of town because they would not consume any food or drink that she made. So first she was tried in 1952, and her defense team took umbrage with the quality of the results and the analysis done of the exhumed bodies. 11 of the 13 corpses that were attributed to Marie tested positive for varying levels of arsenic. But her lawyers, well paid, as she was quite wealthy, maintained that the court's testing system was flawed. So the judge ordered a second round of tests to be administered to the exhumed bodies, and the case was dismissed and the matter put on hold while a new round of testing looking for arsenic in the remains of the bones was performed. The second trial took place in Bordeaux in 1952, and while awaiting trial, Marie was actually placed in Section 5 of the prison, which was known as the elite section. Her attorneys were the best of the best, the crème de la crème, if we're speaking in Francais. And Marie's ill-begotten fortune was really the reason that she had such a good defense, because at this point she had inherited so many different people's fortunes that she was able to pay for defense experts and, a litany of lawyers. So the prosecution definitely had their work cut out for them. Marie's lawyers in the second trial argued that it was arsenic in the system, in the various, exhumed bodies systems, but that the arsenic was actually runoff from various streams that made their way into the local cemetery. So where the bodies reposed was actually a breeding ground for arsenic-related poisoning post-mortem. The prosecution disagreed with this and alleged that Marie had knowingly poisoned her victims with arsenic over an extended period of time, thus leading to their untimely deaths. The prosecution also brought in a psychological expert who administered an ink blot test to Marie, and they critiqued her as being abnormant normal, which is abnormally normal. and ultimately said that she had une extraordinaire puissance de dissimulation, which is an extraordinary ability to conceal or cover up the truth. So ultimately, she was a really good liar and probably a sociopath in how normal she was able to present herself. This second trial was again adjourned in favor of pursuing more evidence through exhumation and more scientific testing of the remains. In June of 1958 was the third and final of the 3 trials that would take place for Marie. Her lawyers, well worth the astronomical fees that they had by now, accumulated and charged her, were able to prove that the prosecution had majorly bungled the evidence that they were presenting. They messed up the organization and cataloging of the body parts so that there was a kidney from one of the victims being tested that got put in the same exhibit A as the gallbladder of another victim whose body had been tested. The nail in the prosecutorial coffin was when the eye of one of the victims was found in a random skeleton of another victim. The defense called it the wandering eye, and really it was what made the jury decide to, after only 3 hours, acquit Marie. And Marie Besnard, who murdered 13 people, was acquitted without the ability to be retried for the same crime. Not really for lack of evidence, but for lack of overall organization and quality of admissible preserved evidence, which was now decades old. Some of these cases spanned back to 1927, if you go back to her first husband. So it really wasn't a lack of evidence, but just a lack of preserving the evidence and organizing the evidence that led to her not being charged, which is why the chain of command and all of the safeguards that we have in place today are so important. After all was said and done, 13 bodies later, having spent only an accumulated 5 years incarcerated, Marie Besnard, the so-called La Reine des Empoisonneurs, or the Queen of Poisoners, ended up getting away with all 13 murders and was able to die peacefully, sans arsenic poisoning and its gruesome effects, at the ripe old age of 84. She decided to donate her body to science.